The bulldozer was still running when I pulled into my own driveway. "This land belongs to the association now, Mr. Kincaid," Marlene Ashford said, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. "You should have read the bylaws." Behind her, 3 acres of 90-year-old vines lay in splinters. My grandfather's vineyard, planted in 1931, gone in an afternoon. Here are the numbers that still make my stomach turn. $220. That's what every homeowner in Comfort Ridge Estates paid every single month for something called ground rent. 312 homes. Do the math. That's $823,680 a year flowing into an account Marlene Ashford controlled alone. Over 6 years, investigators would later put the number at $1.4 million, and not 1 cent of it ever came to my family. Because the land under those 312 houses, it was never the association's to rent out. By the end of this, Marlene Ashford would write a restitution check for $1.47 million, lose her license to manage any HOA in the state of Texas, and stand in a courtroom in the same designer blazer she wore the day she flattened my grandfather's vines. Except this time, there'd be no clipboard to hide behind. None of that money was the real reckoning, though. The real reckoning was quieter. It came in a manila envelope, hand-delivered to 312 doors on a Tuesday morning in October. Some folks call it eviction. I call it rent finally coming due. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am, what that vineyard meant, and how a woman in a white Range Rover ended up owing me a piece of land she never knew I owned in the first place, because she never once bothered to check whose name was actually on the deed. My name is Walter Kincaid. Everybody calls me Walt. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a licensed land surveyor for Kerr County, and if there's one thing 3.5 decades of reading property records teaches a man, it's this: paper doesn't lie, people do. Paper just sits there, waiting for somebody patient enough to go looking for it. I was about to become that somebody. But that Tuesday, standing in my own driveway, watching a Caterpillar D6 grind my family's history into mulch, I didn't say a word about deeds or patents or any of it. I just took out my phone, time-stamped it, 2:47 p.m., and I started recording. My great-grandfather, Ezra Kincaid, rode into the Texas Hill Country in 1897 with a wagon, a wife named Louisa, and a homestead patent signed by the State Land Office that granted him 160 acres along Comfort Creek. That patent is still in a cedar box in my hall closet, the paper gone soft as cloth, the ink browned but legible. Ezra built a 1-room cabin first, then a barn, then, in 1899, a dining table out of burr oak that his own hands plane smooth, the same table I still eat breakfast at every morning, the wood dark and cool under my palms, worn into a shallow dip in the center from 120 years of elbows. His son, my grandfather Thomas Kincaid, planted the vineyard in 1931, during the driest years anybody in this county could remember. He said grapes were stubborn enough to survive Texas, and he was right. That vineyard fed 3 generations of Kincaids through droughts, through the Depression, through my own father's 2 tours overseas. I grew up smelling crushed muscadine grapes every September, the sweet, rotten sugar smell that meant harvest, mixed with diesel from the old Ford tractor my dad never could bring himself to sell. There's a family cemetery on a rise above the creek, iron fence gone orange with rust, 6 graves inside it, Ezra and Louisa, Thomas and his wife Alma, and my own parents, laid to rest under a live oak that's older than the state of Texas itself. I mow that cemetery myself, every month, rain or shine. It's the only ground on this whole 160 acres I never once considered selling, leasing, or letting anybody touch. The rest of it, I made a different choice back in 1998. Developers came sniffing around, offering good money to lease out the back 90 acres for a cottage-style subdivision. I was younger then, still working full-time, land-rich and cash-poor, the way a lot of ranching and farming families are. I didn't sell the ground, I leased it. 99 years, ground lease, filed and recorded at the county courthouse, same as anything else. The homes would belong to the people who built them, but the dirt underneath, forever, belonged to a Kincaid. That's the piece almost nobody in Comfort Ridge Estates ever understood. They thought they were buying land. They were buying a house that sat on land I still owned outright. Fee simple, homestead patent going all the way back to 1897. I never advertised that fact. Didn't need to. I collected a modest lease payment through a property management company for years, kept to myself, tended my grandfather's vines on the back 3 acres I'd carved out and kept for my own family's use, never part of the lease, never part of the HOA. My land, plain and simple, the way it had always been. Then Marlene Ashford got elected president of the Comfort Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, and everything changed. Marlene drove a white Range Rover with dealer plates that never seemed to expire, always parked at an angle across 2 visitor spots, like the rules were something other people followed. She wore blazers that cost more than my truck payment, carried a clipboard everywhere like a badge of office, and had a way of talking to people that made you feel like you'd tracked mud into her house even when you were standing on your own porch. 49 years old, twice divorced, and, as I'd later learn, about $340,000 in personal debt she was quietly working off with money that was never hers to take. She told the Comfort Ridge homeowners, in a laminated newsletter mailed out the year she took office, that the association held title to all common ground, recreational parcels, and undeveloped acreage within the platted boundaries, including, as it turned out, the very 3 acres where my grandfather's vineyard stood, land that had never once been part of any plat, never conveyed, never sold, never even leased. I was down in Corpus Christi for 6 weeks that spring, helping my sister recover from hip surgery. While I was gone, Marlene decided the HOA needed a new clubhouse and pool complex, and she decided my vineyard was exactly where it needed to go. I drove back from Corpus Christi on a Sunday, tired, my sister's walker still rattling around in the truck bed, thinking about nothing except a hot shower and my own bed. I came up the county road, past the Comfort Ridge Estate sign with its fresh coat of paint, and that's when I saw the dust still hanging in the air over what used to be my grandfather's vineyard. I parked crooked. I don't even remember stopping the engine. I just walked. 3 acres, 92 years of vines, some of them original rootstock from 1931. Planted by a man who'd walked this ground in Depression-era boots. All of it was gone. Not pruned, not relocated, gone. The earth turned over in raw red gashes. Roots and trunks pushed into a burn pile 40 feet high at the edge of the clearing. The air smelled wrong. Diesel and turned earth where there should have been muscadine and creek water. That's when Marlene Ashford's Range Rover came bouncing up the access road and she stepped out already talking. "This land belongs to the association now, Mr. Kincaid," she said, clipboard against her chest like a shield, sunglasses pushed up into hair that didn't move in the wind. "You should have read the bylaws, Section 4, Article 12, all unimproved acreage within the development boundary reverts to common HOA ownership after 10 years of, quote, non-conforming private use. Your little grape operation back here hadn't been maintained to code standards. We're building a clubhouse and a pool. It's already been approved by the board." I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the burn pile. I looked at the bulldozer, a Caterpillar D6, still ticking as it cooled. I looked at the man in the cab who wouldn't meet my eyes. "Whose bylaws?" I finally said. Not a question, just words, flat so I could hear myself think. "The Comfort Ridge Estates Homeowners Association bylaws," Marlene said, like she was talking to a child. "Filed with the county. I can email you a copy if you'd like. Though, I'll be honest, Mr. Kincaid, it might have helped if you'd shown up to a single HOA meeting in the 6 years I've been president." She smiled, the kind of smile that isn't for you, it's for whoever might be watching. "We tried reaching you. Notices were posted." "Posted where?" "The community bulletin board, by the mailboxes." She glanced at her clipboard. "And I believe a certified letter went out in March." I hadn't gotten any certified letter. I made a note of that, silently, the way I'd learned to do 30 years of surveying disputed property lines, where half of winning a fight is never letting the other side know you're keeping score. I took out my phone, time-stamped it right there out loud, the way I testified in enough courtrooms to know exactly how this needed to look on record. Sunday, April the 14th, 4:19 p.m. Marlene Ashford, President, Comfort Ridge Estates HOA. On site during demolition of Vineyard, planted 1931. Property historically maintained by the Kincaid family. I started taking photographs. The burn pile, the bulldozer tracks cutting across ground that had never once in 92 years seen anything heavier than a tractor. The stumps, torn and raw, roots thick as my wrist, snap clean through. You can't sue the association for landscaping decisions on association property, Marlene said, already turning back toward her Range Rover, like the conversation was over because she'd decided it was. I'm not suing anybody, yet, I said. I'm just taking pictures. 3 days later, a letter arrived at my house, not certified, just tucked into a HOA envelope with the little Vineyard and Cottage logo on the front, the one Marlene had commissioned 2 years back for $11,000 of association funds, as I'd later find out. Inside was a fine notice, $4,200 for, and I quote, unauthorized agricultural structures and non-compliant vegetation obstructing planned association improvements per bylaws section 4, article 12, subsection C. They were fining me for the vineyard they'd bulldozed on my own family's homestead land. I sat at my grandfather's oak table that night, the one Ezra built in 1899, the one with the dip worn smooth by 3 generations of elbows, and I didn't get angry. Anger's expensive, and it doesn't win anything. I got methodical instead. I called my nephew Denny, works in the county clerk's office, and asked him to pull every recorded document touching Comfort Ridge Estates going back to 1998, the year I signed the original ground lease. I called the lawyer I'd known since we both testified in the same water rights case back in 2004, a woman named Priscilla Chen, who didn't do HOA law but knew exactly who did. And I started writing every certified letter I sent from that point forward with return receipt requested. Because if Marlene Ashford wanted to talk about documentation, I intended to bury her in it. It took 11 days for the county records to come back. Denny brought them over in a banker's box, and we spread everything across my grandfather's table. The plat maps, the original 1998 ground lease agreement, filed and recorded, my name right there on it, Walter E. Kincaid, lessor, 99 years, 312 residential lots. The homes belonged to whoever bought them, the dirt underneath belonged to me. Then we found the other document, the one Marlene had been quoting from, a Declaration of Common Area Transfer dated 2019, purporting to convey the vineyard acreage and several other undeveloped parcels from the original ground lease into HOA common ownership, signed, supposedly, by me. I have never signed a document in my life with a signature that loops the K in Kincaid like a cursive backwards 6. I called Priscilla that same night. She looked at the scanned signature for about 4 seconds before she said, "Walt, that's not just wrong, that's forged badly. Whoever did this wasn't even trying." That was the moment the whole thing cracked open for me. Not just personal spite, not just one woman with a grudge and a bulldozer, but something bigger, something with a shape to it. Because if Marlene had forged a land transfer, that meant she needed people to believe the HOA owned ground it never owned. And if she needed people to believe that, I thought about the newsletter. All unimproved acreage within the development boundary reverts to common HOA ownership. I thought about the ground rent line item I'd seen on HOA fee schedules taped up by the mailboxes, $220 a month, folded in with landscaping and pool maintenance like it belonged there. 312 homes, $220 every month. I did that math sitting right there at my grandfather's table, and my hands went cold doing it. That was around the time I met Dorothy Vance. She lived 4 lots down from the demolished vineyard in a small stone cottage with a wheelchair ramp somebody had built crooked and an oxygen concentrator humming in the front window 24 hours a day. 78 years old, widow of a Vietnam combat medic and a two-tour army nurse herself back in the 60s, she still had her old service ribbons framed on the wall, right next to a photo of her late husband in uniform. I found her on her porch the week after the demolition, crying, an HOA violation notice trembling in her hand. $300 for an unmowed lawn because her riding mower had broken down, and her fixed income from a $1,340 monthly pension didn't leave room for repairs, let alone a $300 fine. They said if I don't pay by the 15th, they'll put a lien on my house, Dorothy told me, oxygen tube hissing softly under her nose. 31 years I've lived here, Walt. My husband and I bought this lot the year it was platted. I don't know where I'd go. I looked at that violation notice, official HOA letterhead, same little Vineyard and Cottage logo, same threatening language about liens and foreclosure referrals I'd seen in my own fine notice. And I thought about Marlene Ashford's white Range Rover, parked crooked across 2 visitor spots, and her blazer that cost more than my truck payment, and the forged signature with the backwards 6. Dorothy, I said, don't pay that fine yet. Give me a little time. I think there's something bigger going on here than either one of us understood. She didn't know it yet, and neither did I, not completely, not the full $1.4 million of it, not the 6 years of stolen ground rent, not what it would take to make this right. But sitting on that crooked porch ramp, listening to her oxygen machine hiss, I understood one thing clearly. Marlene Ashford was about to find out exactly whose land she'd been standing on. I went back inside and sat with Dorothy at her kitchen table while she made 2 cups of instant coffee with hands that shook a little, whether from age or nerves I couldn't tell. Her kitchen smelled like menthol rub and old coffee grounds, a small window unit rattling in the corner because her central air had gone out the summer before, and the HOA had cited her for the temporary window unit as an unauthorized exterior modification. Another $40 fine, paid, receipt taped inside a kitchen drawer, along with a dozen others going back 3 years. You've been paying every one of these, I said, looking through the drawer with her permission. Parking fines, landscaping fines, a $150 fine for a unauthorized flag display, which turned out to be a small American flag she flew for her husband every Memorial Day. What choice did I have? Dorothy said. Marlene told me at a meeting once, right in front of everybody, that veterans don't get special treatment just because they served. Said the neighborhood has standards. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug like she needed the warmth. I served 22 months in an evac hospital outside Da Nang, Walt. I've buried more boys than I can count. I didn't come home to get bullied by a woman with a clipboard. I didn't say much right then. I just wrote it all down. Dates, amounts, the flag fine, the window unit fine, the same way I'd learned to document a disputed fence line. One fact stacked on another until the picture couldn't be argued with. Walking back to my truck that evening, I passed 3 of my neighbors out by the mailboxes, the same bulletin board Marlene claimed to have posted her notices on. Ray Higgins, retired postal worker, was pinning up a garage sale flyer. His wife Connie stood next to him, arms crossed. "Heard about your vineyard, Walt," Ray said. "Damn shame. My boy used to pick grapes back there when he was a kid. You remember that?" "I remember," I said. "Marlene's been raising the ground rent again too," Connie added, lowering her voice like the clubhouse itself had ears. $220 a month now. Used to be $180 when we moved in. She says it's for land maintenance and taxes. Connie shook her head. Never did understand why we're paying rent on ground we already bought a house on. That word, rent, landed different in my chest now than it would have a month earlier, because I knew something Connie didn't. I knew the only ground lease ever filed for that subdivision had my name on it, Walter E. Kincaid, lessor, and I hadn't collected a raised rent from anybody in years. Whatever land maintenance and taxes Marlene was charging, it wasn't flowing anywhere near me. That night, back at my own kitchen table, I laid Dorothy's fine receipts next to the forged 2019 transfer document and the original 1998 ground lease, and I started building a timeline the way I would have laid out survey markers on disputed acreage. Methodical, dated, impossible to dispute later. $220, 312 homes. 6 years since Marlene took office. I picked up a pencil, did the multiplication by hand twice to make sure I hadn't made an error, and stared at the number for a long moment in the quiet of my own kitchen, the refrigerator humming, my grandfather's clock ticking on the wall. $823,680 a year. I thought about Dorothy's oxygen machine hissing in her front window. I thought about a $300 lien threat over an unmowed lawn. And I thought about a woman in a white Range Rover telling a decorated combat nurse that veterans don't get special treatment. I picked up the phone and called Priscilla Chen. It was almost 10 at night. "I need everything you can pull on Marlene Ashford," I said. "Financial records, HOA bank statements, anything with her name on it. I think we're not looking at a bulldozer problem anymore, Priscilla. I think we're looking at a bank account problem, a big one." Priscilla called back 4 days later with a voice I hadn't heard from her before, careful, the way lawyers get when they found something bigger than the case they started with. "Walt, I ran the HOA's registered agent filings with the Texas Secretary of State," she said. "The Comfort Ridge Estates Homeowners Association bank account isn't held in the association's name. It's held in an account titled Comfort Ridge Community Holdings, LLC. Marlene Ashford is the sole managing member. Formed in 2018, 1 year before that forged transfer document you found." I sat with that for a moment, my coffee going cold in front of me. So the ground rent isn't going to the HOA at all. It's going through the HOA's books, on paper, so it looks legitimate on the annual disclosure statements homeowners get, Priscilla said. But the actual deposits route into that LLC account within 48 hours, every month like clockwork. I pulled 6 years of Kerr County records. I can't get bank statements without a subpoena, but the LLC formation alone, next to that forged deed, Walt, this isn't sloppy management. This is a structure. Somebody built this to move money quietly for a long time. How long before we can move on it? "Not yet," she said. "We need the deed authenticated. We need a forensic document examiner on that signature. And honestly, we need her to slip." People like this always slip. The confidence that lets them build something like this is the same thing that makes them careless when they think nobody's watching. She didn't know how right she was. Marlene slipped 4 days later, and it wasn't careless in the ordinary sense. It was cruelty, filmed by 3 separate doorbell cameras up and down Comfort Ridge Lane, and it happened to Dorothy Vance. I got the call from Ray Higgins a little past 10 in the morning. "Walt, you need to get over here. Marlene's got a crew at Dorothy's place with a chainsaw." I drove over fast enough that my truck fishtailed on the gravel turn. What I found was Marlene Ashford standing in Dorothy's front yard in a cream-coloured blazer, clipboard in hand, directing 2 men from a landscaping crew as they took a chainsaw to the live oak in Dorothy's front yard, the one her late husband had planted the year they moved in, 31 years ago, with a small brass plaque at its base that read, "In memory of our first spring here, Frank and Dorothy, 1993. Dorothy stood on her porch ramp in her housecoat, oxygen tube trailing behind her, screaming for them to stop, one hand gripping the rail so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Marlene, please," Dorothy was saying, over the shriek of the chainsaw. "Frank planted that tree. Please, that's all I have left of him out here." Marlene didn't even turn around at first. When she did, she had to raise her voice over the saw. "Ma'am, this tree is a fire hazard per the association's landscaping ordinance, and you're 3 months delinquent on your assessment fees. The lien process has already started. Consider this a courtesy. I could have had this whole property cleared." "It's not a fire hazard, it's an oak tree," I said, walking up the drive, phone already out, already recording. Mam's tree has stood on her own property for 31 years. Marlene's eyes cut to me, and for just a second, I saw it. And the doorbell camera, 2 houses down, caught it too, time-stamped 10:14 a.m. Something like real anger flashed across her face, something that had nothing to do with fire hazards or landscaping ordinances. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Kincaid," she said. "Mrs. Vance's account is delinquent. The board authorized removal of hazardous obstructions on delinquent properties. It's in the bylaws." "Which bylaws?" I said. "The ones with your backwards 6 in them?" I watched that land. Just a flicker, but it landed. She didn't know yet how much I knew, but she knew I knew something. "Get off this property," she told me, "or I'll have you removed for trespassing on association common grounds." "This isn't common ground," I said. "This is Mrs. Vance's lot. Her name's on the deed to the house, and it's my land underneath it, same as it's been since 1998. I kept my phone up. "Cut that tree down, Marlene, and I promise you, you're not cutting down a fire hazard. You're destroying private memorial property belonging to a combat veteran, on camera, with witnesses." She hesitated, just long enough that I thought maybe it would end there. Then she looked back at the crew and said, flat and cold, "Finish it." The chainsaw bit back into the trunk. Dorothy made a sound I still hear sometimes, late at night, somewhere between a sob and a moan, and she sat down hard on her porch step because her knees gave out. I went to her, got an arm around her, kept my other hand holding the phone steady, recording every second, the tree coming down, the plaque getting kicked loose in the wood chips, Marlene walking back to her Range Rover without a backward glance, already checking her phone like she had somewhere better to be. That was the moment I stopped thinking about this as a property dispute. I didn't confront her again that day. I didn't need to. I had 4 minutes and 31 seconds of video, time-stamped, with 2 additional doorbell camera angles. Ray and Connie were happy to hand over once they heard what happened. I had Dorothy's fine history. I had the forged transfer document. I had Priscilla's research on the Shell LLC. What I didn't have yet was the one piece that would make all of it undeniable. Proof, ironclad, and recorded, of exactly what Marlene Ashford believed she owned, and exactly what she didn't. So instead of shouting, I went quiet, quieter than I'd been the whole time. I drove to the Kerr County Clerk's office the next morning and requested a certified, sealed copy of the original 1998 ground lease, along with a certified copy of Ezra Kincaid's 1897 homestead patent, still on file, still valid, chain of title unbroken for 126 years. I paid for a licensed abstractor, a woman named Judith Farrow, who'd done title work in this county for 20 years, to run a full title search on every parcel in Comfort Ridge Estates. Her report, delivered 9 days later, confirmed everything I already knew in my gut. The HOA held no recorded interest whatsoever in the land itself. Every home in that subdivision sat on ground I owned outright, leased to homeowners collectively through the 1998 agreement, which named me, not the association, not any LLC, as sole lessor. Then I did something that would matter more than anything else I'd done up to that point. I had Priscilla draft formal notice under Texas Property Code Section 5.021, governing the enforcement and termination of long-term ground leases, along with language citing Texas Penal Code Section 32.46 for securing execution of a document by deception, the statute covering exactly what that forged 2019 transfer amounted to. I filed a formal complaint with the Texas Real Estate Commission regarding Marlene's unlicensed handling of association funds, and I contacted the Kerr County District Attorney's Office directly, requesting a meeting, bringing the doorbell footage of the oak tree as my first exhibit. I didn't do this loud. I didn't do it fast. I went to 3 separate county offices over the course of 6 weeks, gathering permits and certified letters the way a farmer gathers hay before a storm. Not because I was in any hurry, but because I understood, better than most, that the difference between a man who wins in court and a man who loses is almost always paperwork filed early and filed right. I also, quietly, started notifying witnesses. I sat down with Ray and Connie Higgins at their kitchen table and asked if they'd be willing to sign sworn affidavits about the ground rent increases, the bulletin board notices that were never posted, the certified letters that never arrived. I sat with Dorothy again, this time with a small recorder between us, and asked her, gently, to tell me everything, every fine, every threat, every time Marlene had made her feel like her 31 years in that cottage meant nothing. "Why do you need all this, Walt?" Dorothy asked me, her oxygen machine ticking softly in the next room. "Seems like you already know she's crooked." Knowing it and proving it in a way a judge can't argue with are two different things, I told her. "I've spent 34 years reading property records for a living, Dorothy. I've learned that the law doesn't care how angry you are. It only cares what you can put in front of it." I filed the eviction and lease termination notices with the county on a Thursday, effective and enforceable, sitting quietly in a drawer at the courthouse waiting for the right moment. I scheduled a licensed process server. I coordinated, through Priscilla, a joint appearance by the Kerr County Sheriff's Civil Division and a reporter from the local paper who'd covered HOA fraud cases before and had a nose for exactly this kind of story. Marlene Ashford had no idea any of it was coming. As far as she knew, she'd cut down an old woman's memorial tree, fined a decorated army nurse $300 for an unmowed lawn, and put an aging surveyor in his place for questioning her authority over land she'd convinced 312 families she owned. She was about to learn she'd never owned a single inch of it. The Comfort Ridge Estates monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the second Tuesday of November, 7 p.m., in the clubhouse Marlene had built on top of my grandfather's vineyard. I planned it that way on purpose. If she wanted a building on that ground badly enough to bulldoze 92 years of family history for it, then that building was exactly where I intended to end this. I walked in at 6:58 p.m., with Priscilla Chen on one side of me and Dorothy Vance on the other. Dorothy in her good church dress, oxygen tank on a little cart she pushed herself, chin up the whole way across the parking lot. Behind us came Kerr County Sheriff's Deputy Ray Alvarez, no relation to Ray Higgins, different Ray, along with a licensed process server named Tom Whitfield and a reporter from the Kerrville Daily Times named Sandra Ochoa, notepad already out. The room was maybe 80 people deep, folding chairs, the smell of the new clubhouse still sharp with fresh paint and carpet glue, laid down over ground that used to smell like muscadine grapes every September. Marlene stood at the front behind a podium, clipboard set down for once, going through routine business, landscaping budget, pool maintenance schedule, like it was any other Tuesday. I waited until she opened the floor for homeowner comments. "Marlene," I said, standing, "I'd like to address the association, and I've brought some people who need to hear this too." She smiled that smile that wasn't for me. "Mr. Kincaid, if this is about your grievance with the demolished vegetation, I believe we settled that with the fine assessment." "It's not about vegetation," I said. "It's about ownership." I walked to the front of the room and set a certified, county-sealed folder on the podium in front of her, the abstractor's title report, the 1897 homestead patent, the 1998 ground lease, with my name on it as sole lessor of every lot in Comfort Ridge Estates. "For 6 years," I said, loud enough for the back row to hear, "you've collected $220 a month from 312 homes, telling every family in this room that money was ground rent owed to this association for land the association owns." I let that sit a second. The association has never owned this land. I do. My family has owned it since 1897. Every home you built, every fine you issued, every lien you threatened, all of it sits on ground leased under my name, filed at the county courthouse for anybody who cared to look. The room had gone dead quiet, except for Dorothy's oxygen machine hissing softly beside me. "That's absurd," Marlene said, but her voice had lost its edge. "There's a declaration of common area transfer on file, signed with a forged signature," I said, "which a certified document examiner has already confirmed does not match a single verified signature of mine on record anywhere in Kerr County. which is a criminal offense under Texas Penal Code Section 32.46, securing execution of a document by deception. Tom Whitfield stepped forward and handed Marlene a thick envelope. "Ma'am, you're being served formal notice of ground lease termination under Texas Property Code Section 5.021, effective immediately on the grounds of fraudulent conveyance and material breach. This applies to the clubhouse property specifically, which was never released from the original lease at all." Somebody in the back said, out loud, "Wait, she's been charging us rent on land she doesn't own." And the room started to break apart into murmurs, chairs scraping, people turning to each other. Marlene's face had gone the colour of the fresh clubhouse paint. "This is a misunderstanding that can be resolved." "There's one more thing," I said, and I nodded toward Deputy Alvarez. "Every dollar of that ground rent, $823,000 a year for 6 years, didn't go to this association at all. It went into a private LLC, Comfort Ridge Community Holdings. Sole managing member, Marlene Ashford." That was when Deputy Alvarez stepped forward, calm, procedural, like he'd done this 100 times, because he had. "Marlene Ashford, I have a warrant here for your arrest on charges of theft by deception and forgery of a government document, pursuant to a criminal complaint filed with the Kerr County District Attorney's Office." She actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark before the reality of it seemed to hit her all at once. "You can't do this in front of everybody," she said, and I noticed her eyes going to Sandra Ochoa's notepad, to the phones already coming up around the room, filming. "I can," Deputy Alvarez said, and asked her to turn around. The clipboard clattered to the floor when he cuffed her. Nobody moved to pick it up. Dorothy, beside me, reached over and squeezed my hand so hard I felt it in my knuckles, and I heard her whisper, "Frank would have liked this." They led Marlene Ashford out of the clubhouse built on my grandfather's vineyard in handcuffs, past 312 homeowners who'd spent 6 years believing they owed her something. Her white Range Rover sat crooked across 2 visitor spots one last time before it got impounded as part of the asset seizure 2 days later. The case moved fast once the DA's office had the forensic document examiner's report and Judith Farrow's certified title search in hand. Marlene Ashford pleaded guilty rather than face trial in exchange for a sentencing recommendation 6 months later in the Kerr County Courthouse. The judge ordered full restitution, $1,470,000, covering 6 years of misappropriated ground rent plus interest, to be paid first to me as the rightful ground lessor, and second in a separate court-ordered fund back to homeowners for improperly assessed fines, including Dorothy Vance's $300 lawn fine, her window unit fine, and every dollar she'd ever paid for a flag she flew in honor of her husband. Marlene was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with her HOA and property management licenses permanently revoked across Texas. The 2 landscaping crew members who'd cut down Dorothy's oak testified they'd been told the removal was court-ordered. No charges were filed against them, but both later helped, without pay, replant a young live oak in the same spot. The property management company that had rubber-stamped Marlene's paperwork for years lost its county contract and paid a $40,000 civil penalty for negligent oversight. 2 board members who'd signed off on fine assessments without ever reading the bylaws resigned quietly and weren't charged, though both wrote personal apology letters to Dorothy. As for the ground lease itself, I didn't evict 312 families out of spite, whatever the title of this story promised. I terminated the fraudulent clubhouse and common area subleases Marlene had invented, reclaimed that ground outright, and renegotiated fair, transparent ground leases directly with every homeowner at the original rate, adjusted honestly for inflation since 1998. Nothing close to $220 a month. The families who'd unknowingly paid into Marlene's scheme weren't my enemies. They were victims, same as Dorothy, same as my grandfather's vines. Dorothy Vance, though, the community voted her in as the new HOA president 2 months later, unanimously, in a meeting held outside under the young live oak the landscaping crew had replanted for her, brass plaque reset at its base. I forgave the remaining balance on her ground lease entirely, for life, and had a proper wheelchair ramp built at no cost to her. As for my grandfather's vineyard, I replanted it that spring. Muscadine rootstock isn't as stubborn to establish as 92-year-old vines, but it's stubborn enough. I go out most September evenings now and smell that same sweet, rotting sugar in the air, mixed with diesel from the tractor I still can't bring myself to sell. I sit at Ezra's oak table some nights, running my thumb along that worn dip in the wood, and I think about what this whole mess taught me. That paper outlives people, and it doesn't lie, even when the people holding it do. That the folks who abuse the most power are usually the ones who counted on nobody ever checking their homework. That protecting a vulnerable neighbor isn't charity, it's just decency wearing its work boots. And that land, real land, homestead land, remembers who it belongs to, even when the people standing on it forget. Dorothy still waters that young oak tree every morning, oxygen tube trailing behind her, humming some old tune from her army days. Last week, she told me the county assessor's office called about a different property 2 roads over, an old cattle ranch, tangled up in a dispute with a different developer entirely, and she wondered, half joking, if I might know anybody who could look into it. I told her I might know somebody. Turns out a lifetime reading property records for a living tends to make a man useful in more places than just his own backyard. That got me thinking about the days right after Marlene's arrest, how the whole neighborhood seemed to exhale at once, like a held breath finally let go. Ray Higgins caught me at the mailboxes about a week later, still shaking his head. 31 years I lived next to that woman's decisions, and never once thought to ask who actually owned the ground under my own house, he said. Feels stupid, looking back. It's not stupid, I told him. It's just how these schemes work. Nobody questions the person holding the clipboard until somebody finally does. Connie came up behind him with a plate of banana bread, still warm, wrapped in foil that steamed a little in the cool morning air. This is for you, she said, pushing it into my hands. For Dorothy's tree, and for everything else. We should have said something years ago, Walt, about the fines, about all of it. We just figured that's how HOAs were. Petty, expensive. You pay and you keep your head down. That's exactly what she was counting on, I said. Word traveled fast after the story ran in the Kerrville Daily Times, Sandra Ochoa's byline above a photo of the handcuffs, the clipboard on the floor, Dorothy's oxygen cart just visible at the edge of the frame. 2 other HOAs in the county reached out to Priscilla in the weeks that followed, homeowners quietly asking her to look into their own ground rent arrangements, their own common area declarations. She told me later that one of them, a development out past Ingram, turned up almost the same pattern, a forged transfer, a shell LLC, a president who drove a car nicer than her salary should have allowed. That one's still working its way through the DA's office as I tell you this. Dorothy's first meeting as HOA president happened on a Saturday morning instead of a weeknight. Her choice because she said mornings were kinder to old knees and older lungs. She held it outside, folding chairs set in a half circle under the new live oak, its leaves still small and pale green, nothing like the broad shade Frank's original tree used to throw. The brass plaque sat freshly reset at its base, polished so it caught the morning sun. In memory of our first spring here, Frank and Dorothy, 1993. She ran that meeting like she'd been doing it for years instead of days, called for a vote on capping any future fine at $50, required 2 board members' signatures before any lien could even be discussed, and stood there with her oxygen tank humming beside her while she said, "Nobody in this neighborhood is going to lose their home over an unmowed lawn again, not while I'm sitting in this chair." 80-some neighbors clapped for that. I watched her from the back row, and I thought about her crying on that porch ramp with a $300 violation notice trembling in her hand, and I had to look away for a second, because a grown man crying at a folding chair HOA meeting is not a good look, even in front of friends. Afterward, walking back toward my truck, I passed the spot where the burn pile used to sit, 40 feet of splintered vine and root that had smoldered for 2 days back in April. There was nothing there now but young rootstock, knee-high, staked with green plastic ties, leaves just starting to widen in the autumn sun. I stood there a minute, hands in my pockets, and I thought about Ezra Kincaid riding in with a wagon and a wife and a patent from the State Land Office, having no earthly idea that 126 years later, his great-grandson would be standing on this same dirt, defending it from a woman in a designer blazer, instead of drought or hail or bad crop prices. Different enemy, same stubborn ground. Dorothy found me there a few minutes later, pushing her oxygen cart slow across the grass. "You look like a man thinking too hard," she said. "Just thinking about my grandfather," I said, wondering what he'd make of all this. "I expect he'd be proud," she said, "and I expect he'd tell you the same thing I'm about to. Don't go looking for trouble, but when it finds you, Walt Kincaid, don't you dare look away from it either." I laughed, and she laughed, and somewhere behind us, Connie's grandkids were chasing each other around the new clubhouse, shrieking with the kind of joy that doesn't know anything about ground leases or forged deeds or clipboards. Just grass and sunshine and a neighborhood finally breathing easy again. That old cattle ranch 2 roads over though, that one was going to take a different kind of patience altogether.